So this video we're going to look at some of the tools that are right here built into your Mac. So I've got my folder here. Sorry, Grand Canyon.jpg, and that's our original file. We'll open that up, and then with that I can do open and with the preview. I've got the markup tool open, and the first one we're going to look at here is where these little sliders are. It says adjust color. So if I click on there, you'll see it pops up a little adjust color setting, and that pop-up has exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, saturation, temperature, tint, sepia, and sharpness. It also has levels up here. Now if I click auto levels, let's just see what it does. Not a whole lot for this image. Not really see a huge adjustment, so I'm just going to do reset all. Just like our Photoshop program and some of the other programs we've looked at, we can use these levels and curves. I encourage you to watch the video that introduces the concept of levels and curves if you haven't watched it yet. But if I click this middle point, I can increase the brightness values by dragging it to the left, or I can increase the darkness values by dragging it to the right. And for us, maybe adding more shadow information here in the canyon would be kind of interesting. And so adding a little more shadow, darkness, increasing our dark values might be a good idea. So that actually looks pretty good. I might be happy with that, but we're going to reset and look at some other functions. It has that exposure, and we looked at that in a couple programs. If I increase the exposure, the longer the exposure, the brighter it's going to be. The less exposure, the darker it's going to be. And so you can see my whole histogram. You can see my whole histogram slide to the left or right there. Usually just a small adjustment, maybe a little bit brighter, a little bit darker, might be useful for your photo if it's just a little bit underexposed or a little bit overexposed. So let's do reset. There's the contrast slider. So the contrast is just going to spread out those values. So adding a little contrast kind of has the same effect of darkening those shadows in the canyon there. If I lower the contrast, it's going to kind of start to wash out the image. Everything's going to look a little less dark. Some of those shadows are going to start to go away. So we'll just do reset all. You have highlights, so the stuff that's brighter in the image, by increasing the highlights is going to make it a little more brighter. Now this particular image doesn't have any huge amounts of bright values, but if you look in the sky, it's kind of recovering some of those values by increasing the highlights. Now shadows would be looking at the darker values and trying to increase or change some of those values. So if I go to shadows and increase this, it's actually taking the values that were in the shadow and kind of eliminating them. You can use these sliders in tandem, so you could maybe lower the exposure a little bit, go to the highlights, and then try to recover a little bit of that highlight adjustment or detail. You could raise the shadows to try to get it to be a little less than dark. But honestly, if you're going to do that many adjustments, this level probably is the better way to do that, because I can adjust my shadows. I could adjust my brightness level by just kind of lowering this down a little bit, making everything a little less bright, or a little more bright. Saturation, so if I wanted to make the colors a little more, rich, I could increase that. If I want to remove some of that saturation, I want it to wash out and look a little more black and white, I could lower that down. The color temperature, so right now it's set to the default that the camera took it at, but I could make it warmer by going to the right, or I can make it cooler by going to the left, so you can see how blue that gets. You do have tint. There's a tint control. If you go to the right, it's going to make it kind of more like magenta. And if I go to the left, it's going to look a little more green. You can sepia tone it, and you can control the colors that you choose, so it just kind of adds that little orange hue to it. And then sharpness is supposed to make the detail a little bit crisper on there. So like if you look at maybe the mountain here, the canyon, and you increase sharpness, some of those little points are going to pop out just a little bit more. So you can use a combination of all of those things to kind of manipulate this. If I wanted to maybe add a little bit of those shadow values, then maybe raise my saturation a bit to get, maybe the trees a little more pretty there. But that's pretty much the functions for adjusting the color and brightness here. So let's say I want that. We'll just leave this alone and close that whole little palette there. The next thing we can look at is adjusting the size or cropping this image. So if I do adjust size, this is going to pop up, and we have a few different options. We can fit it into custom, and we could do a drop down. So if we were doing that thumbnail like we did earlier in pixels, we could put it there, or we can go here and manually type it in, pixels or percent, etc. We can also control the resolution, and we can also scale this proportionally, meaning that it's locked. It's not going to squish the image. So right now, if I put this at 1920 by, it would go to 1440. So that's not exactly what we want to do. So we do need to crop this image in some sort of fashion to make this work. So let's cancel this. We'll look for a crop tool first, and then we'll resize this. Okay, so now that we've looked at the scale, we need a way to kind of get this image to be closer to that 16 by 9 size that we're looking for. So there's a couple different ways to do that. It's a little less easy than some of the other programs, but we can kind of go to rectangular selection, and we could draw out the shape that we think we want. And if we knew we needed 1920 by 1080, it does display it here at the bottom. So we could go here and then select 1920 by 1080. Get pretty close. Because if we're pretty close, even just resizing it a little bit won't be a huge deal. And then we could figure out which part of the image we would like to have. Now, this can be a little limiting, because if I wanted more of this image, then this is probably not the best way to do that. So a different step to start with could be resizing this to one of the dimensions. So let's do 1920, and then we end up with 1920 by 1440. So we'll hit OK. Then we'll have to go back into the editing mode. We'll go here to our rectangle tool, and simply this time we know that all the way across is 1920. We just need to find 1080. So somewhere around there's pretty close. I'll stretch this out and make sure we get it all the way to the edge. So now it's kind of the more or less the space we have to work with. We got this. If I wanted to keep a little more of the sky, I could. Then we'll hit this little crop tool up here. And then one final time we'll go to scale, and we'll make sure this is 1920 by 1080 by just unlocking this. 1920, 1080. That gets us to the exact size that we needed. And then we'll export this. So we'll just do File, Export.